The Christmas tree dominated the room, a towering monument of light and excess that reached almost to the ceiling. White and gold ornaments glittered beneath the crystal chandeliers, and strands of lights wrapped around its branches cast a warm, unforgiving glow over everything beneath it, including her. She sat at a small table placed deliberately near the tree, the divorce papers spread neatly in front of her like they were part of the decor. Heavy, cream-colored cardstock, black ink, clean margins. Everything about them was elegant, far too elegant for something that felt like an ending. A string quartet played softly near the windows. Laughter floated across the marble floor in waves, punctuated by the clink of champagne glasses and murmured conversations. People dressed in tailored suits and glittering gowns moved around her, pausing just long enough to glance at the scene before pretending not to stare. She felt every one of those glances. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers clenched together so tightly they ached. She'd learned over the years how to sit still, how to look composed even when her insides were unraveling. Tonight was no different. Except tonight, the unraveling was public. "Whenever you're ready," the lawyer said gently, sliding the pen toward her. She didn't look at him. Instead, her gaze drifted to the tree above her. The lights blurred slightly as tears welled, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She remembered standing beneath a Christmas tree years ago, laughing as he'd lifted her off the ground, promising her a life that would never make her feel small. That man stood across the room now. He hadn't come closer. He hadn't spoken to her since the papers were placed on the table. He stood near the bar, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. People gravitated toward him without realizing why, drawn by something calm and commanding in the way he held himself. When he spoke, they leaned in. When he fell silent, they waited. She didn't look at him directly. She was afraid if she did, she wouldn't be able to finish this. "This is just a formality," the lawyer said quietly. "Everything's already been agreed upon." She nodded once, her throat tight. A woman nearby laughed too loudly. Someone toasted to new beginnings. The music swelled slightly, filling the air with false cheer. She reached for the pen. The moment her fingers closed around it, the room seemed to tilt. The weight of it surprised her. So small, so final. Her hand trembled as she lifted it, hovering over the line where her name waited. She could feel the eyes on her now, curiosity masked as politeness, sympathy sharpened by gossip. Under the Christmas tree, she felt exposed, like something fragile placed on display. She lowered the pen to the paper. The first letter of her name appeared in ink, dark and permanent. Her vision blurred as a tear finally escaped, sliding down her cheek and dripping onto the page. She didn't wipe it away. "Let them see," she thought bitterly. "Let them see what this costs." A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Her chest tightened as she forced herself to continue. One signature. That was all it took. One line to erase years of promises, of half-truths, of nights spent waiting for a man who was never fully present. Her hand shook harder now, and then a shadow fell across the page. A large hand covered hers, warm and steady, stopping the pen mid-stroke. The room seemed to freeze. Music continued to play, but softer now, as if the sound itself was holding its breath. Conversations trailed off. Heads turned. She gasped, her fingers loosening as the pen was gently but decisively taken from her grasp. "No," he said quietly. The word wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was absolute. She looked up, her breath hitching as her eyes met his for the first time that night. His gaze was dark, focused, entirely on her, the rest of the room erased. There was no hesitation in his expression, no doubt, just resolve. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Not like this." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Everyone is watching," she whispered, panic threading through her voice. "I know," he replied calmly. "Let them." The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir!" He didn't look away from her. "This isn't happening tonight." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. People shifted, whispers beginning to rise. She felt dizzy, torn between humiliation and a sudden, dangerous flicker of hope she'd sworn she'd buried long ago. He straightened slowly, still standing beside her, his presence like a shield. "Christmas is for family," he said, his voice carrying now, calm but commanding. "Not for public executions." Silence followed. Under the glittering lights of the tree, with the papers still spread before her, she realized something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a husband stopping a divorce. This was a man reclaiming control of a moment that was never meant to be hers to endure alone. And whoever had forced her into this, whoever thought they could break her publicly, had just made a very dangerous mistake. The pen hovered over the paper again, her hand still trembling despite the warmth of his fingers lingering where they'd stopped her before. The room hadn't fully resumed its rhythm. Laughter returned cautiously. The music softened, like it too, was unsure whether it was allowed to exist yet. She drew in a slow breath and let her gaze drift, not to the tree, not to the watching faces, but inward. This wasn't where it had begun. It had begun in quiet moments that never quite made sense. Long evenings spent alone in their penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows while dinner went cold on the table. Texts that said running late without explanation. Phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. At first she'd told herself it was normal. He was busy, important. A man with responsibilities she didn't need to understand. She remembered the way he used to watch her from across a room, eyes following her like she was the only thing that mattered. How he'd touch her wrist in passing, grounding, possessive, in a way that made her feel chosen. That version of him had faded slowly. Not all at once, not dramatically, just absence. Silence where there used to be laughter, space where there used to be warmth. Nights when she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she'd become invisible to the man she loved. She'd asked questions. "Where do you go at night? Why can't you tell me what you do? Why do people look at you like that?" He never lied to her. That was the cruelest part. He just didn't answer. "I'm protecting you," he'd say, voice calm but distant. "From what?" she'd asked once. He'd kissed her forehead, already pulling away. "From my world." It had felt noble at first, romantic even, until it felt like rejection. Until protection became isolation, and isolation turned into loneliness so sharp it cut. She remembered the night she'd finally broken. She'd waited for him. Again. The table set for two. Candles burned down to stubs. Midnight passed, then 1. When the door finally opened, she hadn't yelled. She hadn't cried. She'd simply asked, "Do you still want to be married to me?" He'd gone very still. "Yes," he'd said. "Then why does it feel like I'm already alone?" He hadn't answered that either. That was when she realized something devastating. Love wasn't enough if it lived in shadows. She wanted partnership, truth, a life where she didn't feel like a guest in her own marriage. The silence had grown heavier after that, words unspoken piled up between them until they felt insurmountable. When the lawyers appeared, discreet, polite, efficient, it almost felt like relief. Someone else making the decision she was too tired to keep fighting. Signing the papers had felt like an act of survival. Back in the present, she looked down at the ink smudged by her tear, at the unfinished signature waiting patiently for its ending. She'd told herself this marriage was already broken, that whatever they'd been had eroded beyond repair. And yet, his hand on hers had shattered that certainty. She glanced up at him now, standing beside the table like he belonged there, like this had always been his place. His expression was controlled, but beneath it something simmered. Not anger, regret. She'd never seen that on him before. "Why now?" she whispered, keeping her voice low. "Why stop me now?" His gaze softened, just for her. Because this isn't how it was supposed to end. A lump rose in her throat. You let it get this far. Yeah, he said quietly. And that's on me. The honesty hurt more than any excuse would have. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably nearby. Guests pretended not to listen while hearing everything. She thought of all the nights she'd cried alone, all the questions unanswered, all the times she'd felt like loving him required erasing herself. This marriage hadn't broken in one moment. It had fractured slowly, painfully, through silence and absence and secrets she'd never been allowed to understand. And as she sat there beneath the Christmas lights, pen still hovering, she realized the hardest truth of all. She hadn't stopped loving him. She'd just stopped believing there was room for her inside his world. The pen felt heavier the second time she picked it up. Not because anything about it had changed, but because now she understood exactly what it represented. Not just an ending, but a choice she believed she had to make in order to keep breathing. Survival, dressed up as dignity. Escape disguised as strength. She drew in a shaky breath and nodded once to herself. This was the only way forward. Around her, the party had resumed its careful imitation of normalcy. Glasses clinked again, though more softly now. The quartet played on, bows gliding over strings with restrained precision. Conversations stayed polite and deliberately vague, as if no one wanted to be caught acknowledging the fracture at the center of the room. She sat straighter, lifting her chin, forcing her spine to hold the weight of the moment. Her fingers wrapped around the pen, white-knuckled, her hand trembling despite her efforts to steady it. She focused on the paper. The line where her name waited seemed longer now, more final. This is how you survive, she told herself. You stop asking. You stop hoping. You stop waiting for answers that never come. She lowered the pen. Ink touched paper. The first letter bloomed in black, smooth and irreversible. Her breath caught in her chest as the motion unlocked something inside her. Years of swallowed questions, of nights spent alone, of loving someone whose life she was never allowed to enter. A tear slid down her cheek and dropped onto the page, warping the ink slightly. She didn't wipe it away. Let this be honest, she thought. Let it show what this costs. Her hand shook harder now, but she forced herself to continue. One signature. One clean motion. Then it would be over. She was halfway through her name when everything stopped. Warmth. Solid and unmistakable. His hand covered hers. The pen froze mid-stroke. The world seemed to hold its breath. She gasped softly, the sound catching in her throat as she looked up. He stood beside her now, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, the steady calm of him anchoring the moment. His grip was firm but gentle, stopping her without hurting her, without force. No, he said quietly. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Her heart slammed against her ribs. You can't, she whispered, panic threading through her voice. This is already done. It's not, he replied, eyes locked on hers. Not yet. She swallowed hard, the pen still trapped between their fingers. Everyone is watching. I know, he said calmly. That's why I'm here. She laughed softly, the sound brittle. Now? After all this time? His gaze flickered with something dark and heavy. I should have been here sooner. The admissions stole her breath. The lawyer cleared his throat, stepping closer. Sir, if we could... He didn't look away from her. Give us a moment. The authority in his voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The lawyer hesitated, then stepped back. She stared at him, torn between anger and the dangerous flicker of hope she didn't want to feel. You don't get to stop me now, she said, voice shaking. You don't get to decide this after years of silence. I'm not deciding for you, he said. I'm asking you to wait. For what? She demanded. For another excuse? Another secret? For the truth, he replied. The word hung between them, heavy and electric. Her grip on the pen loosened involuntarily as her breath hitched. Truth. The thing she'd begged for and never received. The thing that had hollowed her marriage out from the inside. "You should have given me that before," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "and I will answer for that, but not by letting you sign something you were pushed into." She glanced around, suddenly acutely aware of the room again, of the watching eyes, of the way people pretended not to listen while leaning just a little closer. "No one pushed me," she said weakly. His eyes softened, but his voice didn't. "You wouldn't be signing this here if you weren't being forced." Her breath caught. Because he was right. She'd been told it would be cleaner this way, quicker, less scandal. As if humiliation was preferable to privacy. She looked back down at the page, at her half-written name, at the tear-stained ink. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't keep loving someone I don't understand." He leaned closer, his voice meant only for her. "Then let me make you understand." Her heart thundered. Slowly, deliberately, he took the pen from her fingers and set it aside. The room erupted into whispers. She sat there, empty-handed beneath the Christmas lights, her signature unfinished and her life suspended between what she thought she needed to survive and the man who refused to let her end it like this. And in that suspended moment, she realized something terrifying. For the first time in years, he wasn't hiding. He was choosing to be seen. And that changed everything. The silence spread outward from their table like a ripple in still water. It wasn't immediate. At first, it was just a pause, a fraction of a second where laughter lagged, where the music felt suddenly too loud for the space it occupied. Then the whispers began. Soft, urgent, dangerous in their curiosity. "Is he really?" "I heard." "No, that can't be." She felt it before she saw it, the shift in how people looked at him. Not as a husband interrupting a divorce, not as a man acting on emotion, but as something else entirely. Something that commanded attention without demanding it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly or posture. He simply stood there, one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair, the other relaxed at his side, as if he had all the time in the world. And somehow that was worse. The lawyer swallowed and took a half-step back, instinct overriding protocol. A waiter froze mid-step with a tray of champagne flutes. Conversations near the bar died out completely now, heads turning openly instead of pretending not to watch. "Please," a woman murmured somewhere behind them. "That's him." She looked up at her husband, really looked at him, and realized how little she truly knew. She knew the man who kissed her forehead before leaving for work, the man who held her hand at charity galas and said just enough to charm without revealing anything, the man who kept his phone face down and his emotions carefully contained. But this man stood like the room belonged to him. Someone laughed nervously, too loudly. It cut off almost immediately when his gaze flicked in that direction. Not sharp, not angry, just acknowledging. The laughter died on the spot. He turned back to her, his attention narrowing again, the noise of the room seemingly irrelevant. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her heart was racing. "They're all staring." "They'll get over it." The certainty in his tone sent a chill down her spine. A man she vaguely recognized, one of his business associates, she thought, approached cautiously, his smile tight. "This isn't the time," he said under his breath. "There are people here who—" "Who what?" her husband interrupted calmly. The man faltered. "Who expect this to be finished?" Her breath caught. Her husband tilted his head slightly, studying the man like a problem already solved. Then they misunderstood the situation. The associate opened his mouth, then thought better of it. He nodded stiffly and retreated. She stared after him. What was that? His jaw tightened. Pressure. From who? He met her gaze. Not you. The whispers grew louder now, no longer contained to the edges of the room. Phones appeared discreetly in hands. Someone's glass shattered near the bar, the sound echoing too sharply in the tense quiet. Still, he didn't move. Security, she realized then there was security, shifted subtly around the perimeter of the room. Not in a show of force, just presence, controlled, alert. She leaned closer to him, lowering her voice. "What's happening?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes swept the room once, taking everything in, the exits, the guests, the people who were watching too closely. Then he leaned down, his mouth near her ear. "You're seeing the part of my life I tried to keep from you," he murmured. Her pulse spiked. "Why?" "Because it's not gentle," he said, "and I wanted you to stay that way." She pulled back slightly, searching his face. "You hid this from me." "Yes." "Everyone here knows something I don't." "Yes!" The admission landed like a blow. "Then why stop this now?" she demanded. "Why not let me go?" His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something fierce and protective. "Because tonight was never about your choice." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He straightened, his voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding guests without becoming a spectacle. "This signing will not continue." The room went deathly quiet. "If anyone here has an objection," he continued evenly, "they're welcome to speak to me directly." No one moved. No one spoke. Power settled over the space like gravity. She realized then that this wasn't influence. It wasn't wealth or reputation. This was authority. And it terrified her how effortlessly he wielded it. She reached for his sleeve, grounding herself. "Who are you?" she whispered. His gaze softened as it returned to her, the hardness reserved for the world fading just slightly. "I'm your husband," he said, "and the man who will answer for everything I kept from you." Around them the party remained frozen, guests suspended between curiosity and fear, between celebration and something far darker. Under the glittering Christmas lights, she finally understood the truth. The man she thought she was divorcing was a stranger, and the man standing beside her now was powerful enough to silence a room without ever raising his voice. Whatever had forced this moment into the open had underestimated him, and she was standing at the center of it. The music never stopped, but it no longer felt like celebration. What she'd mistaken for elegance now felt orchestrated. The timing of the speeches, the placement of the table beneath the tree, the way the papers had appeared so neatly, so confidently, as if everyone involved had known exactly how the night was meant to unfold. She felt it settle into her bones with a slow, sick certainty. "This wasn't your idea," she said quietly, eyes still scanning the room. "Was it?" Her husband's jaw tightened. "No." The word landed like a crack in glass. She turned toward him fully now, the hum of whispers pressing in from every direction. "Then whose was it?" Before he could answer, a man approached them, older, impeccably dressed, silver hair combed back, a practiced smile fixed in place. She recognized him instantly. Victor Hale, a name whispered in the same breath as power and money. A man who never appeared without reason. "Well," Victor said smoothly, glancing at the unsigned papers, "this is becoming uncomfortable." Her husband didn't move. "That wasn't my concern." Victor's smile tightened. "You agreed to resolve this cleanly. Tonight." "I agreed to discuss terms," her husband replied. "Not to humiliate my wife." Wife. The word sent a jolt through her chest. Victor sighed softly, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Public closure has benefits. Investors appreciate decisiveness. Appearances matter." Her stomach turned. This was about business? Victor finally looked at her, his gaze cool and assessing. "Everything is about business." Her husband stepped subtly in front of her, his presence unmistakably protective. "She is not a bargaining chip?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "You made her one when you married her without explanation." The room felt suddenly smaller. She looked between them, understanding dawning with painful clarity. "You needed us divorced," she said slowly. Publicly. Tonight. Yes, Victor said without apology. A clean break. No rumors, no speculation. Her breath caught. Because of you. Victor nodded once. Your marriage complicated things. Her husband's voice dropped dangerously low. You don't get to decide that. Victor's gaze sharpened. I do, and your silence gave me room to move. The truth hit her all at once. This party, the guest list, the timing, the spectacle, had never been about Christmas. It had been a stage, and she had been positioned at the center of it, expected to perform her role quietly and disappear with dignity. You let them do this, she whispered to her husband, hurt threading through her voice. You let them put me there. He didn't deny it. I thought if it ended cleanly, you'd be safe. Safe from what? She demanded. Victor chuckled softly. From attention. Her husband's eyes flashed. Enough. Victor studied him for a moment, then sighed. You're being sentimental. No, her husband replied calmly. I'm being precise. She felt it then, the shift again. The subtle movement of security. The way Victor's posture stiffened just slightly, like he'd realized he'd miscalculated. This marriage ends tonight, Victor said, his voice hardening. With or without your cooperation. Her husband turned to her, his expression resolute. This was never your failure, he said. They wanted this done where they could control the narrative. She swallowed, rage and humiliation burning through her. So I was supposed to sign and disappear. Yes, Victor said simply. Her husband's gaze snapped back to Victor. You forced this moment. And you allowed it, Victor shot back. Silence fell heavy between them. Then her husband did something she hadn't seen him do in years. He smiled, not kindly. Then you misjudged me, he said. And you underestimated how far I'm willing to go. When someone uses my wife as leverage. The air felt charged now. Dangerous. Victor's smile faltered. Careful. Tonight was supposed to be the end. Her husband continued calmly. Instead, it's the beginning of a very unpleasant conversation for you. She stood there beneath the Christmas lights, heart pounding, realization crashing over her. This wasn't a divorce party. It was an ambush. And the man she'd thought was absent had just stepped fully into the open to stop it. Whoever had forced this moment had believed she would break quietly. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The room felt heavier after Victor stepped away. Not quieter, heavier. Like the air itself understood that something irrevocable had just been set in motion. Conversations resumed in cautious murmurs, but no one laughed now. No one toasted. The Christmas lights glittered overhead, bright and indifferent, illuminating the fracture running straight through the center of the room. Her husband remained beside her, his hand resting on the back of her chair, not claiming, guarding. You're making this worse, someone hissed from behind them. A woman she recognized from his family, an aunt, she thought, impeccably dressed, eyes sharp with disapproval. This didn't need to be a scene. It became a scene the moment you put papers in her hands, he replied evenly. The woman scoffed. She agreed. Her breath caught. She hadn't realized how much that assumption hurt until it was spoken out loud. He turned slightly, enough that his profile faced the woman fully. Consent given under pressure is not consent. The aunt stiffened. You're overreacting. No, he said calmly. I'm responding. She looked up at him then, really looked at the man she'd loved in fragments for years. The restraint in his voice, the precision of his words. It wasn't hesitation. It was control. The kind forged in situations where mistakes cost lives. Another figure approached, his brother this time, she realized, jaw tight, expression strained. You're jeopardizing things, he said quietly. This was the compromise. Her husband's gaze didn't waver. There will be another. Not one that protects her, his brother warned. He turned to her then, his attention narrowing, his voice softening. Do you want to sign these papers? The question cut through the noise like a blade. Every eye seemed to turn toward her again. Her throat tightened. This was what she'd wanted, once. The freedom to leave. The dignity of choice. But now she understood the cost of how this had been arranged. "No," she said quietly. The word felt terrifying and powerful all at once. His jaw set. He turned back to the room.
"You have your answer. This isn't about what she wants,"
Victor's voice carried from across the room.
"This is about containment."
Her husband's eyes darkened. "You don't get to contain my wife." Family members shifted uneasily. Allies exchanged glances. People who'd expected compliance now sensed resistance and danger. "You think this ends well for you?" Victor asked. "Defying us like this?"
"I think it ends, honestly," her husband replied, "which is more than I offered her before."
She swallowed hard. "You're choosing her over stability," someone else muttered. He nodded once.
"Yes."
The simplicity of it stole her breath. "You're risking everything," Victor pressed. Her husband leaned forward slightly, his voice low but carrying. "Everything I built was meant to keep her safe. If it costs me allies who forget that, then they were never worth keeping." Silence crashed down like a wave. She felt tears burn her eyes, not of sadness, but of something dangerously close to relief. All those years she'd wondered if she was a placeholder, a liability, a weakness he'd outgrown. This refusal shattered that lie. He wasn't protecting her by letting her go. He was protecting her by standing. Victor's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." Her husband smiled faintly. "You never had one." Security shifted again, closer this time. The tension vibrated through the room like a live wire. He reached for her hand, not hurried, not possessive. Steady, intentional. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "you won't face it alone." Her fingers curled around his without hesitation. In that moment, beneath the glittering tree and the watching eyes, she understood the truth that changed everything. She had never been disposable to him. She had been the line he refused to let anyone cross. And anyone who tried was about to learn exactly how dangerous that refusal could be. They didn't leave the party right away. That surprised her. She'd expected him to pull her out into the cold night, to disappear before the consequences of his refusal caught up with them. Instead, he guided her toward a quieter corner of the room, away from the tree and the watching crowd, where the music softened and the lights dimmed.
"Give us a moment,"
he said calmly to no one in particular. No one argued. The authority in his voice had settled now, heavy and undeniable. People watched, but from a distance. The spectacle had shifted. This was no longer entertainment. He waited until they were alone before speaking. "I owe you the truth," he said quietly. Her heart pounded. "You've owed me that for years."
"Yes."
He didn't flinch.
"And I failed you by thinking silence was protection."
She crossed her arms, bracing herself. "Start talking." He took a slow breath, as if choosing where to begin mattered. "The man you married isn't the man most people here know." "I'm beginning to understand that," she said. "I don't run a simple business," he continued. "My influence reaches places you've never seen. Governments, markets, people who don't tolerate unpredictability." Her stomach tightened. "You're dangerous." "Yes," he said plainly. "By necessity." The honesty stunned her. "I made enemies long before I met you," he went on. "When I fell in love with you, I knew two things immediately. That I would do anything to keep you safe, and that the safest thing might be to keep you ignorant." Anger flared. "You decided that for me." "I did," he admitted. "And I was wrong." She swallowed hard. "So you pushed me away?" "I created distance," he said. "I made you feel unwanted, so no one would think you mattered." The words hit like a blow. "You made me feel invisible," she whispered. He nodded, pain flickering across his face. "Because invisible is harder to target." Tears burned her eyes. "You let me think you didn't love me." "I never stopped loving you," he said fiercely. "I stopped showing it. The music swelled briefly in the background, then softened again. The world continued to turn, oblivious to the quiet devastation unfolding between them.
Victor and the others, he continued, believed the marriage had become a liability. They thought divorcing you publicly would sever any perceived weakness. And you agreed, she said, bitter. I thought if you left cleanly, they'd stop watching you, he said. I thought distance would finally make you safe.
And did it? She asked. No, he replied. It made you vulnerable. She closed her eyes, breathing through the ache in her chest. All those years of doubt, all that loneliness. You should have trusted me, she said softly. Yes, he agreed. I should have trusted your strength instead of fearing it. She opened her eyes. Who are you really? He held her gaze unflinching. I am a man who commands loyalty through fear when I must. A man who makes decisions that cost other people sleep. And a man who fell in love with someone too good for his world. The truth of it wrapped around her like cold water. And now? She asked. Now I choose differently, he said. I choose transparency over distance, partnership over protection. Her breath hitched. And if I can't live in your world? Then I will build one where you can, he said simply. She searched his face for exaggeration, found none. You let me go because you thought it would save me, she said. Yes. And stopping me tonight? She asked. Because losing you quietly would destroy me, he said. And because I finally understood something too late to ignore. What? That safety without love is just another kind of prison. Silence fell between them, heavy and intimate. She thought of the man she'd married, the careful distance, the unspoken fear, and the man standing in front of her now, exposed, dangerous, choosing her openly. The truth hurt, but it also freed her, and for the first time in years, she believed the marriage hadn't been broken by absence. It had been broken by fear. And fear, she realized, was something they could finally confront, together. The reckoning didn't come loudly. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations in the center of the room. Instead, it arrived the way true power always did, quietly, deliberately, with consequences already set in motion long before anyone realized they were doomed. She noticed the shift before anyone spoke. Phones disappeared into pockets, smiles stiffened. The men who had lingered too close to Victor earlier now found reasons to drift away, suddenly interested in conversations across the room, suddenly careful not to be seen aligning themselves too openly. Her husband stood beside her, calm as ever. But something about him had changed. The softness he'd shown her moments ago had vanished, not replaced by anger, but by precision. Purpose. The version of him the world feared had stepped fully into place. Victor approached again, slower this time, more cautious. You've made your point, Victor said evenly. There's no need to escalate this. Her husband's gaze flicked to him, unimpressed. You escalated it when you turned my marriage into a spectacle. Victor's jaw tightened. You agreed to the strategy. I agreed to end a marriage quietly, he replied. Not to break my wife in public. The word wife echoed again, deliberate and unmistakable. A second man joined them, one she didn't recognize, but whose confidence suggested influence. This has gone far enough, he said. You're jeopardizing more than feelings here. Her husband finally smiled, but it was cold. You're confusing my restraint with weakness, he said. That's an expensive mistake. The man stiffened. Careful. Her husband leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice just enough to force the men to listen. I know exactly which accounts funded tonight's event. I know who pushed the lawyers. I know who leaked the timing to the press. Victor's eyes widened, just a fraction. And I know, her husband continued, which of you believed I wouldn't intervene because I care too much about appearances. The second man scoffed, though his confidence faltered. You wouldn't burn alliances over... Her? He interrupted calmly. I would dismantle empires. The certainty in his voice sent a chill through her. Security moved closer, not to protect Victor, but to flank her husband. Not threatening. A reminder. You wanted the divorce signed under lights, so everyone would see her reduced to a formality, her husband said, so no one would question why she disappeared afterward. Her stomach twisted.
You miscalculated, he continued. Because humiliation is not something I forgive. Victor recovered his composure, though the strain showed. You're overestimating how much leverage you have.
Her husband reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen once before locking it again. Check your messages, he said. Victor hesitated, then did. The color drained from his face. Around them, murmurs rippled through the room. Someone whispered Victor's name in disbelief. Another guest excused himself hastily, already sensing the fallout. What did you do? She whispered. Her husband didn't look at her. I reminded them who I am. Victor swallowed hard. You can't possibly mean to. I down, her husband replied. Effective immediately. The second man stepped back. This is insane. No, her husband said calmly. This is consequence. She watched as the men who had orchestrated her humiliation unraveled in real time. Power shifting. Control slipping. The certainty they'd worn all evening cracking under the weight of a man they'd assumed was too cautious to strike back. They had mistaken his silence for surrender. Her husband turned to her then, his expression softening just slightly. I'm sorry you had to witness this. She shook her head, emotions swirling. They did this to us. Yes, he agreed. And they won't do it again. Victor took one last step toward him. You're choosing her over everything. Her husband didn't hesitate. I always did. I just stopped showing it. Silence fell between them. The men who had pushed too far stood exposed now, not as untouchable power brokers, but as fragile figures scrambling to salvage what they could. She felt it settle in her chest then. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. And the men who had believed they could force her breaking had just learned the truth too late. They hadn't challenged a distracted husband. They had challenged a man who never forgot a debt, especially when it was paid in humiliation. And this time he was collecting. The room didn't recover. Not really. It tried. People resumed conversations in low tones. The quartet found its rhythm again. But the shift was permanent. Something had been revealed under the Christmas lights that couldn't be unseen. Power had changed hands without anyone raising a voice, and now everyone was watching the man at the center of it, waiting to see what he would do next. He turned toward her, not hurried, not cautious, as if this moment had always been inevitable. She felt the weight of the room settle on her shoulders again, but this time it was different. This time she wasn't alone beneath it. He reached for her hand, openly, his fingers lacing with hers in a gesture so intimate and unguarded it sent a ripple through the crowd. Cameras were forgotten. Conversation stopped. The tree lights reflected in polished marble and glass, framing them like a stage neither of them had asked for. She is my wife, he said calmly. The words carried, not shouted, not announced, but spoken with a certainty that didn't allow doubt. A murmur moved through the room. He didn't squeeze her hand tighter. He didn't pull her closer to assert ownership. He simply stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, his posture aligned with hers like a statement. She is not a liability, he continued. She is not leverage, and she is not something to be managed quietly to make other people comfortable. Her breath caught. He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze for just a moment. In his eyes there was no dominance, only respect, apology, resolve. She is my equal, he said, and any future that includes me will include her openly. Someone inhaled sharply nearby. A woman whispered her name. Another guest looked away, suddenly very interested in the champagne flute in their hand. Victor stood frozen near the edge of the room, his authority evaporating in real time. You don't get to speak for her, Victor said weakly. Her husband's gaze never left her. I'm not. He turned to her then, fully, the noise of the party fading into nothing. "Do you want to stay married to me?" he asked quietly. "Not because of pressure, not because of fear, because you choose it." The question wasn't a trap. It was an offering. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must hear it. For years she'd wanted him to choose her, to claim her in ways that weren't hidden behind closed doors, to stand beside her instead of in front of her, or away from her. Now he was giving her the choice back. "I want honesty," she said, voice steady despite the emotion tightening her chest. "I want to be seen, and I want to know that if this world comes for us again, you won't decide for me." "I won't," he said immediately. "I swear it." She searched his face, the man who'd hidden, the man who'd protected through silence, the man who was now standing in full view, unafraid of consequence. "Yes," she said. The word landed softly, and then echoed. Relief crossed his face, brief but unguarded. Not triumph, not possession. Gratitude. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture intimate and reverent rather than performative. Under the Christmas lights, the symbolism was unmistakable. "This marriage continues," he said, his voice carrying once more, "on our terms." No one argued, no one dared. She felt something settle inside her, something that had been fractured for years. Not certainty, but grounding. She wasn't being shielded or hidden anymore. She was being acknowledged. Chosen. As they stood there together, she realized the truth of what he was doing. He wasn't claiming her as property. He was claiming her as truth. As the line no one was allowed to cross. And for the first time since she'd held that pen beneath the Christmas tree, she felt something unexpected bloom where fear had lived. Safety. Not because the world was suddenly gentle, but because the man beside her had finally learned how to stand with her in it. Under the glittering lights, with the watching room bearing witness, she understood this wasn't a reconciliation built on denial. It was a declaration, and everyone present knew it. So did anyone who might ever think to challenge it again. Dawn arrived slowly, pale light creeping through tall windows, as the last of the Christmas lights dimmed. The party had thinned hours ago, guests slipping away quietly, shaken and subdued, leaving behind empty glasses and the echo of a night that had rewritten more than one future. She stood beneath the tree again, the same tree that had watched her hands tremble, the same lights that had illuminated the papers meant to end everything. Only now, the floor beneath it was littered with torn pages, ragged strips of cream cardstock scattered like fallen petals. The divorce papers were unrecognizable. He had torn them himself, not in anger, not theatrically, calmly, precisely, as if he were dismantling something that no longer held authority over them. She watched the pieces rest beneath the tree, and something in her chest loosened at last. "It's over," she said softly. "Not the marriage, but the moment." "Yes," he replied. "It is." They were alone now, the space quiet, except for the distant hum of the city waking up. He stood close but didn't touch her, giving her room to feel what needed to be felt. She exhaled shakily. "I thought our marriage was weak." He turned toward her fully. "It was hidden." She looked up at him, the man she had loved through absence and uncertainty, the man she had almost left because she thought love shouldn't feel like erasure. "You built walls," she said, "and I thought I was outside them." "You were behind them," he said quietly, "where I thought nothing could reach you." Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "You should have let me see the danger." "Yes," he agreed. "I should have trusted you with the truth." The sky outside brightened, washing the room in silver and gold. Christmas morning had come, gentle and indifferent, unaware of what it had repaired. "I don't want to be protected by silence anymore," she said. "You won't be," he promised. "Not again." She stepped closer then, resting her forehead briefly against his chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounded her in a way it never had before, because now she understood what it had carried all along. Not distance, burden. "I wasn't weak for wanting more," she said.
"No," he replied. "You were strong enough to demand it."
She pulled back slightly, meeting his gaze. "And you?" "I was afraid," he admitted, "of losing you, of letting you see the parts of me that aren't gentle. And now?"
"Now I know love that hides becomes fragile," he said. "And love that stands openly survives."
She nodded, letting the truth settle. Together they knelt and gathered the torn pages, not to keep them, but to clear the space they no longer belonged in. When the last scrap was lifted, the floor beneath the tree was bare. Clean. The first rays of sunlight touched the ornaments above them, scattering light across the room. She straightened, feeling something new take root. Not certainty, not illusion, but partnership. "Our marriage wasn't broken," she said quietly. "It was suffocating.